Alright, my friends, welcome to your seat at the table. This is Rick the Batman, and my topic of my video today is why are the Rangers of the North so important? Why are their what they do so important? What is the role that they pursue or provide? And I'm going to get into that. And I have a number of points. As we know, Arnor, at some point, Arnor dissolves into three client states, and then the little petty kingdoms go to war, eventually leaving Arthedain the survivor. Arthedain is constantly besieged and attacked and harassed by forces of the Witch King and Angmar, until eventually Arthedain fails and Arnor becomes a thing of the past. The line of Isildur, the kings whose line in Arnor remains unbroken, devolve or turn into the line of chieftains that pursues for a better part of 1,000 years before we get to the War of the Ring and Aragorn, and we all know the story. So, just why do the Rangers play the role that they do? What's the point of these handful of individuals or small groups of dedicated Dunedain patrol and protect and more or less make their presence known for 1,000 years in what is a defunct country? Well, I got a number of ideas and points on that, of course. They help to guide and protect the line of Isildur to begin with. The idea that, like I said, the unbroken Aragorn's ancestry are going to play a massive role down the road, but in order for that line to remain unbroken, it needs to be protected. They need to have guardians and people to look after them and their families. I mean, that goes without saying. I mean, a single bloodline living in the wilderness makes no sense. And being the chieftain of what? A defunct people? Now, as in previous videos, I've discussed the viability of the Arnorian Dunedain still surviving long after the fall of Arthedain is officially considered, and a large enough population spread out throughout the Northland being intact and providing a source for these rangers, a source for training and protections of families and Aragorn's bloodline. I mean, it matters. They serve some crucial roles. There's also some, as I said, relevance. It's one thing to claim that I'm the descendant of a bloodline of a king, but if I can't prove my bloodline is more than just that, it's not going to likely get a whole lot of attention, let alone acceptance in some place that's much more well established and has kept himself intact for those 1,000 years. So for Aragorn to go to Gondor and lay claim to the kingship, he needs to have some providence. He needs some backstory or backstop. He needs some credence to more than just to be some ragged muffin survivor of a bloodline that's from a defunct country. I mean, so the Rangers are an established and maintain a fragment of both the royal claim to the north as well as adding to the heir's claim of legitimacy. And what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, Arnor as an entity ceases to exist. And yet, there's still something going on up here. There's still some Arnorian Dunedain in large enough numbers to maintain a viable blood pool of people and to maintain their elite or their high man blood. They're not going to diminish. They're not going to their lifespans are going to be a little bit more robust and a little longer than their Gondorian cousins. They're not going to become lesser Dunedain. Their education is going to be top notch. Their knowledge, their skills are going to be top notch. And this isn't something that comes from a group of people that are scratching a living and surviving and hiding in the hills of a defunct country far to the north. By creating these, quote, rangers, these rangers are like the last vestige of a royal government bureaucracy of a country, in this case Arnor. So by having this continuing organization, let's call it this organization that continues to affect the king's law, or in this case the chieftain's law, but the law of the or of the Dunedain in the north, and protecting the inhabitants, the weak and the unwary, from the hostiles of both the wilderness and of the evil races that occasionally harassed this region of the area. So having this group, well-trained group of protectors, these would-be royal rangers still running around up here, gives a bit more legitimacy to Aragorn's the Line of Isildur. So the Line of Isildur isn't just some hillman, some hillman tribal chieftain and a couple hundred of his subjects living up in the woods and hills. There's more going on here. There's more credence to the, I guess what I'm saying is they serve this not so much as some kind of beacon of hope or something like that, but it's this: we still rule in Arnor. We still protect and defend the peoples who live here, as we would have if the king and a kingdom the king had a kingdom and subjects. So that fact that the Royal Rangers, the Northern Rangers, the Dunedain, play an important role. They're different in a lot of aspects than from the Rangers in the Gondor Rangers, such as the Rangers in Ithilien that Faramir leads. That is they're still Rangers, don't get me wrong. They're still a military force, but it's utilized in a much more military-minded unit. But these Rangers in the north are elite individuals, an elite group of people who have a higher moral calling, or this higher moral or high view of things to come. So they serve as not just as protectors and defenders of this country in exile, if you will, or this country in hiding, but the bloodline of the king, and gives the king a neo-military organization, an elite unit of individuals or people that he can call upon. So Aragorn's forefathers actively led the elements of the Rangers to protect and to defend and to actively pursue evil wherever they could within the bounds of Arnor itself, what once was Arnor. So going to the next point, defending, quote, the good in the north. We're back to that second point, but a little more in depth. So when I looked at the Northern Dunedain Rangers, the Rangers of Arnor, these fellows, and I don't necessarily believe it was just men. I believe that men, women, all serve a different role, or can all serve actively, and numbers matter. So when we already have a small population, there's no reason why that it wouldn't take advantage of everybody who wants to do their part. So defending the good in the north. These are the folks that help maintain life in Bree. Bree doesn't get overrun or destroyed or taken over by evil folk, in part because the Dunedain Rangers of Arnor are actively keeping an eye on things. They make themselves known. Aragorn earned himself a title called Strider by the locals, and some of them were suspicious of the Rangers' motivations, because they couldn't quite fathom or understand exactly what these guys and gals were about and what they were doing. But I think that was far more important than Breelanders would know. And the Shires the same way. They helped protect the Shire for hundreds and hundreds of years and helped the Hobbits thrive as a culture and as a community, both in part because that's just what their job is. I mean, that's what they chose to do, but also in part because they're going to be future subjects of the king, and were once subjects of the king, and thus need to be kept protected. It also allows for the Dunedain in hiding, the surviving Arnorian Dunedain, to have access to the products and the foodstuffs and other things that are produced in these smaller communities, such as the Shire and Breeland, and that makes perfectly good sense. So they would also kind of keep an eye on the two main roads, the Greenway, and the Dwarven East-West Road, and protect travelers, unwary travelers, as much as they can, and to keep the evil at bay, or at least thinned down, make it sure that we don't see wandering bands of orcs and goblins and trolls ranging further west every year, because these fine folk are making sure that don't happen. Whenever opportunity gives them a chance to intervene and to put a stinging reminder on these evil types, they take that opportunity. They work in tandem with the elves, so it's not like, which brings me to another point. The next point was that it's implied that the Rangers in Arnor are never in great number. At most, they never exceeded more than a few hundred. And if you look at, like my previous video on the topic of the viability of a population, so if we have between 500 and 5,000 Arnorian Dunedain still living in Arnor in hiding, only a percentage, 1 or 2% of that population, if that, are going to be Rangers. And that's because it takes a certain kind of calling and a certain type of motivation and a certain individual who's going to go out of their way to effect the training that they need to have, and to learn the skills, both woodland skills and martial skills, that allow them to not only survive but be very good at what they do. You're just not going to have a large percentage. And it's just like we don't have a standing army. That's not to say that the chieftain couldn't call upon these hidden villages and manors for a limited duration thing, like when the goblins raided the Shire. We may never know that the current chieftain of the time didn't rouse the quote militia of the northern Arnorians, the Arnorian Dunedain, and brought together a couple hundred or 1,000 at most able-bodied, because pretty much every able-bodied Dunedain is going to have some basic martial training. They're going to be able to defend their homesteads and their little thorps and villages and themselves, at least to a certain degree. I mean, you'd almost have to, in order for that society to even in hiding, to still not only exist and to survive, but to thrive. So the fact that the Rangers would be the cream de la crop, or the elite commando unit of the king in exile, the king in hiding, however you want to look at it. So that serves a role too. Then we have the other role. The next point is that the Northern Rangers help keep alive the manifest destiny. There's a belief that among the Dunedain, especially the High Dunedain, the descendants of the original faithful, the ones who have this elite mindset, this ingrained belief in their superior status and their responsibility of that status or position in both Dunedain and just human society, because the Dunedain tend to be the leadership. So if we look at Gondor, we look at Gondor, and we look at Arnor when it was still in existence. We look at Gondor. We look at any place where the Dunedain Umbar are present. They tend to be the ruling class. And then there's lesser Dunedain who tend to be supporting the ruling class and or leadership in their own right to a bit of a degree, but the lion's share of the population are middlemen or lesser men in some aspect, depending on how your view on that is. So the same thing goes in the north. And with this mindset that the Arnorians are taking a long view of the eventuality of the return of the king. So we know, unlike down south in Gondor, the Dunedain and surviving Dunedain and Arnor know that the line of Isildur still exists, that their chieftains are kings and blooded kings, and not just blooded kings, but blood of Eladel, the High King. So they have claims to both Gondor and Arnor, and pretty much every Numerian Dunedain settlement anywhere in Middle Earth. And that's how one of the presses over the centuries, including Aragorn, when he goes in and recaptures or takes over Umbar for the fifth or sixth time for Gondor. It's the same. I have this right to do so. It's manifest destiny. So the Rangers and their service helps to keep this manifest destiny alive. It helps to keep the Arnorian Dunedain alive and active and thriving, and this bloodline of Isildur relevant, giving him some more than just some distant blood claim to the kingship. It's because through act and through deed and through generations of act and deed, the chieftain and the rangers are pursuing the royal mandates that were set down in the past, trying to keep. It's not just trying to keep something a legend alive, so to speak, but trying to prepare for that future king rising, for Aragorn's ascension. And it's important. It brings me to probably my last point on this. I think the high men, noble and wizened, guided and adjusted and advised by the elves, such as Elrond and Gandalf when he's in the region, were extensionally trained in the wilderness survival and operatives and rangers as an elite force. That fact that not only this is one of these things that sets the Arnorian Rangers apart, the Northern Rangers apart from the Southern Rangers, the Gondor, is their training and their philosophy with their interaction with the elves and with their own ancient traditions. In part, for a culture to thrive and exist, you're going to have some continuance. And in part, that's what this ranger group does. It's this continuance of the royal responsibility, the king's bloodline's responsibility to protect the peoples, and into maybe to some element of the ancestral sites of Arnor. So these rangers serve numerous roles, numerous purposes, but they are this neo-political bureaucracy connection to the past. They probably came out of a ranger force or a force of elite Dunedain of Arthedain's royal army, and they chose to become the guardians of the line of Isildur, but also the guardians of Arnor in exile, or Arnor in memory. So not only do they, otherwise, why would they range up here? What's their purpose? Like I said before in other videos, I don't believe that these are people who were born, raised in Gondor, and suddenly had this epiphany that they needed to come up here and to pay homage to an ancient fallen kingdom and try to help right? So the fact that the Rangers do what they do and have the impact that they have is grossly important to the line of Isildur and Aragorn's claim to kingship. And in order for these Rangers to be as effective as they are, to be an army of one, if you want to use that cliche, that they are going to have high moral standards. They're going to be high men themselves. Most of these are not lesser Dunedain or non-Dunedain. These are high Dunedain, possibly descended from families of the faithful and the nobility of Arnor, not from Gondor, but Arnor. And their own family lines, as much as possible, are going to continue to propel those views of their ancestors. And then they're going to be gained training and influence from the elves as their mentors, and people like I said, like Elrod and Gandalf are going to play roles in their existence and help make them better and be more efficient and to be more clever. But their drive and morale and sense of purpose is all connected. And with all together, this is why, in my opinion, the Rangers of the North are so important to not only Aragorn's claim to the kingship, but the survival of the Northern Dunedain in hiding, and the survival of these more peaceful places that are still up here. You know, the elves can look after themselves, the dwarves can look after themselves. Breeland is just tiny. Anybody rolls over it, Breeland's gone. The best they can do is run into the hills, hide, and then come back. The Shire is pretty good size. I mean, we don't know how many hobbits live in the Shire, but we know from the maps that there are 20 or better towns and villages. I mean, there's several actual towns and a number of villages and little thorps, but there's probably 40 or 50 of them. And you have a couple within the Shire. We have a couple political boundaries. We have the Thane in Pippin's the Tooks in Tookland. Tookland is a political entity within the boundaries of the Shire that's more or less ruled by their own leader, the Thrain, which is actually a political appointed position, I believe, which was appointed by one of the last kings of Arthedain, or one of the kings of Arthedain, when the Hobbits came in and established themselves. And then later the Brandybucks, when they crossed the river and set up Buckland, created their own little country within a country. So and their own little leadership and things like this. So we're looking at thousands of hobbits, potentially tens of thousands of hobbits that live in what was the heartland of Arthedain, and continue this culture with their own culture, but this thriving agricultural economic base in former Arnor, which, like I said in previous video, is crucial to the survival, and not just the survival, but the thriving of the Arnorian Dunedain in hiding, which I truly believe exists, because there, once again, to reinforce my previous video on the topic of having a Dunedain population remaining in Arnor is linked to both the line of Isildur and the Rangers. Why would the Rangers exist if there wasn't a population here for them to support them, for them to come from, and to protect? The Rangers would have no real purpose or reason to do what they have done for 1,000 years. And to support the line of Isildur, Aragorn's ancestors didn't just eke out they didn't have some shack in the woods or some crude cave that they lived in. We don't know the exact extent of how they survived and what they did, but I made my argument in the previous video. I do not believe that they settled among the elves or the dwarves, because there's a number of good reasons for them not to do so, and I said that in the previous video. And it's just the same reason for the Rangers. Why bother having Rangers at all? Who created them, who coordinates them, who supports them, who supplies them, who motivates them? What's the purpose and point of having them at all? The elves can protect the region and they do, when to a limit, just like the dwarves can protect the region to a limit. They don't intervene directly in affairs of others unless they need to, and the elves traditionally really don't either. I think I'm going to have to do a video on that, my opinions on that, on the elvish position in the latter days of the Third Age, and why they don't take a more active role that they do, and then when they do take a role, why is it so they tend to come in with us at the last minute and risk life and limb, right, for the what would be considered a lesser races, if they were racist, and they're not. But I've always wondered since I read the books when I was a kid, why did these men and women call themselves rangers? Other people may have called them rangers, maybe they don't call it themselves, but I tended to believe that they do, and the reason behind it is that it's a last vestment of the royal leadership, the royal government of Arnor still staking a claim. It's because of the Rangers' existence and their activities, and because of the surviving Arnorian Dunedain who still live here in isolated groups and clusters, in hiding, that they still have a claim to the place politically. The Gondor doesn't come north because they don't have a claim to Arnor, except in name or in perhaps maybe philosophically, but they have no real stake in it. Well, the Rangers have a big stake in it, and the reason for that, their whole existence is to perpetrate, to continue that stake, continue keeping a claim to this place called Arnor, and to help the bloodline of the king survive and thrive, and to maintain a political claim on Arnor. So that, in a nutshell, is why the Rangers in the north play such a crucial role and an importance on many fronts. And it's a lot deeper than what people think it is. And like I said, if you guys got a difference of opinion on this, you got some other ideas, you think I'm wrong, you think I'm right, by all means, put in your comments in below, make your own videos, explain to me what you think and why the importance and why the Rangers of the North are relevant, and their true purpose and their true reason for existing. Till next time, this is Rick.